Okay, here we go. Today I want to talk about things that have been happening in the news, about the difficulties that we've been experiencing during this time, about George Floyd's death, and the pandemic, and various other things that have been very stressful for us during this time, and talk about it from a Buddhist perspective. So we are definitely in a time of difficulty. We are experiencing pandemic. Some people are experiencing deep economic hardship that's frightening and disabling. We are experiencing the social upheaval of racism, sexism, LGBTQI phobia. We're experiencing a resurgence of anti-Semitism, the destruction of the environment. We have an erratic, narcissistic, exploitive majority in our government, and we fear the end of democracy as we know it. I would say that that is pretty distressing. But you know, previous generations have also experienced these deep hardships and upheaval. Even in the most recent history of the United States, my generation, I'm a baby boomer, experienced the assassination of 3 people who we considered agents of change for the good: Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, and his brother Bobby Kennedy. Our male friends were being drafted into the military to fight the Vietnam War. There was rioting, mass demonstrations, including the student who was killed at Kent State by the National Guard. Our government was engaged in indiscriminate killing in Southeast Asia. Again, there were protests and social upheaval. In the 60s, we had the beginning of the civil rights movement again. Then in the 70s, the women's rights movement again. Gay rights, disability rights. And in the 1980s, we experienced the AIDS epidemic. We have seen our dream of black rights, gay rights, religious freedom, women's rights in the image of the United States as a place of refuge disappear. Yet during that time, we also felt hope that we were bringing about change. And we did. Because now we fight from the new base of that change. In my parents' and their parents' generation, there was World War I from 1914 to 1918, overlapping with the flu pandemic, which happened between 1918 and 1920. Then 11 years later, there was the Depression from 1929 to the late 30s, in which a vast set of the population experienced unimaginable poverty. And then a few years later, it was followed by World War II from 1939 to 1945. And of course, during World War II, many atrocities, including the Holocaust, which also included gay people and other people who were considered undesirable by the Germans, other than the Jews, which was the most sizable population that was annihilated and eradicated during that time. Immediately after the war, there was the polio epidemic and McCarthyism in the United States. Throughout this time, there was racism, religious oppression, and prejudice against Germans, Japanese, and other cultural groups. Yet people felt hope that their efforts were bringing freedom and justice to the world, and they formed the United Nations, enacted the Marshall Plan, brought peace to the world, and found a vaccine for polio. And I'll just stop here for a second and say that a wonderful book about all these issues in the United States is this book by John Meacham called The Soul of America. And that was published last year. The Soul of America. Yet all through this time and in the present, we still have racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, you name it, we still have these injustices. There have been corrections and hopeful times that have come out of these upheavals. Throughout these years and those that have come before in human history, and there are many, many that have come before, we have been beset with genocide, poverty, tyrannical leaders, racism, religious oppression, and please forgive me that all that I have left out in this litany of woes that we as human beings have experienced over the years. Some have to do with things outside our control, and most of them, I would say, have come about from things that are in our control. Right now, this week, because of the death of George Floyd, things feel pretty bleak. It seems as if lynchings are now being performed by the police. So this is a long history in the United States of black people being killed disproportionately. Yet, as you can see, we have almost never been in a time in which these things, in some form or another, has not been present. Because we have so much access to information these days, we cannot look away from this. I think this is good that we see so vividly now and we know what is wrong. We should not look away. We are overwhelmed by this craziness. Coupled with the coronavirus, we are fearful. Many people are not just afraid for their health, but they have the almost unbearable burden of wondering if they will continue to have a home to live in, a job to go to, and food to eat. And they don't see much help coming from our government. If you are African American or a person of color, you are experiencing the uncertainty yet again and the terror of the lynching of your loved ones by the police, justified by some petty infraction. This is the weight of our collective racism. And sometimes it feels as if it will never be resolved. So, what does Buddhism have to say about this? In Buddhism, we say that we live in the Saha world. This is the world of Shakyamuni Buddha's Buddha field, which means it is his birthplace and it is his place of work as a spiritual leader. It is the community in which we are born. It is the community in which we strive to practice, in which we make effort to learn the Bodhisattva's way. In Buddhist cosmology, there are innumerable Buddha fields, each with its own Buddha and unique characteristics. Our Buddha field, again, is the Saha world. Our Buddha field is a place in which trouble basically is the norm. And I think if you look through the written history of human beings, we know that we have been beset with these tragedies throughout human history. The word Saha means land of endurance. The Saha world is the land of endurance. This world is like graduate school for the cultivation of patience, compassion, wisdom, sanity, equanimity, and beneficial action in response to this crazy, chaotic, unfair, impermanent, scary life we live as humans. This is our graduate school, the Saha world, the world of the Bodhisattva, the world in which Shakyamuni Buddha came and made this his Buddha field. As Dogen Zenji, the founder of our school in Japan in the 13th century, said in Shobogenzo, Flowers of Emptiness, a bodhisattva is born in fire. A bodhisattva is born in the midst of fire. And furthermore, it is the life of the Bodhisattva to live in that fire and respond from that fire. Without fire, there is no need for Bodhisattva practice. There is no need for your equanimity when everything's great. There's no need for your patience. There is no need to work with your anger when everything is going your way. It is when things are difficult, times like this, when we need to feel compassion, empathy, patience, kindness, sanity. We need to sit in the middle of this fire and respond to the cries of the world. We don't try to jump out of the fire. We don't try to get off the wheel of birth and death. We stay, we learn, and we help. So the question is, at least the question people ask me as a Buddhist teacher is, what do we do? What do we do now? What do we do about this? Everyone wants to answer this question. So here's what I think, and what I think our teachings tell us. First, we stay the course of our formal practice in order to develop the qualities that enable us to find equanimity, which in turn allows us to respond with actions that are helpful. Furthermore, we don't throw fuel on the fire of suffering. All this is local. It's not an abstract idea. We ask ourselves, what can I do that is helpful? How can I begin? How can I begin with myself and see the pain that I cause and look in my own mind, my own heart, my deepest vow? But again, this is not just a practice of introspection. We also must do something within the context of our abilities. We respond, we march, we give money, we vote, we agitate. In 1853, the abolitionist minister Theodore Parker said this: "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, and from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." So I'll read that again. Theodore Parker said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, and from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." This is the Bodhisattva vow. If we look back from the lens of 1853, we can see that change has come, that it has been incredibly messy and sometimes violent, yet we are speaking up. We are making change. I know it feels like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but I think in many ways the arc is bending towards justice. Yet, at times it feels as if we are not moving. We fear that this time things won't change. But from a Buddhist perspective, we know that we live in the Saha world. We know that it will never be perfect. As humans, we keep messing it up. We forget how to be civil to each other. We get caught in fear. We create violence and suffering for each other. For those we see who are caught in injustice and dream of a perfect world, which we also share, we must continue to raise our voices, and we must preserve what we have gained and build upon that base. In our practice, we must be agents of this learning, changing, bending, the supple branch of justice that seems so ready to whip back into injustice. We must hold that arc, pass the torch, help each other. And we do it as we have always done it. We do it by becoming more mature ourselves. We do it locally as community. We do it as a nation. We do it as a world. We meet each situation as best we can. We put ourselves on the front line, armed with our faith, our logic, our empathy, and community of like-minded bodhisattvas, all born in fire and functioning in the fire. There is no lack of suffering that must be addressed. As the Saha world, our lives will never be perfect. Our perspective never complete. As a community, humans will probably never see eye to eye, and we will always have people who will want to protect themselves through oppressing others. Nevertheless, we carry on. We carry on within the context of our ability, mentally and physically. This is our practice. This is our faith. It is our hope and the basis of our response as we work to follow the Bodhisattva way. Whether we be practice neophytes or old masters. This effort begins with your own practice as guided by the Buddha Dharma. At the same time, it is enacted in a larger arena within the capacity of your eye of practice and the context of your life's circumstances. In all of the examples I gave, there were counterbalancing events, effort made, heroes and villains. If we are the smallest heroes, let us support the more visible heroes together. If we are the visible heroes, let us not forget the army that supports us. I can't tell you what you should do, because each of us has different capacities, resources, and fields of activity. No matter what we do, take up the Buddha Dharma as your map and compass. Follow the traces of the heroes born in the fire of the Blue Lotus. We take solace and hope in their effort. We learn from the path they have trod. We build upon their endeavors and become part of the solution. Thank you very much.